I'm Joseph Sarosy. I'm the co-author of How to Tell Stories to Children. And to give you a little perspective on that, and this is what really today I'll be talking about a lot. I'm not a professional storyteller. I'm not going on stage. I don't represent myself that way. It's not really my interest. My interest is with my daughter and with my students. And so what Silke, my partner, and I share is really about helping folks like you and others connect with your kids through the power of storytelling. And that can be in elaborate and exciting, adventurous ways. And it can also be in small and simple ways. And I will say that Silke and I, having done this work now for a little while, we spend quite a bit of our time just supporting folks, getting comfortable in kind of, the storytelling role. And so that's me. That's my approach. I think storytelling is really about connecting, and I really want to help people do that. So that's where I'm coming from. I would love to give people just a brief moment, if you would like, to just share where you're coming from and why you came today. So I'm just gonna go down our list real quick, and if you would like to say hello, you can, and if you don't wish to, then that's also perfectly fine. Sue, was it you that I was just speaking with? Yes, okay, great. So thank you for sharing. Early childhood educator, great, thank you. Great to know where you're coming from. Can I ask Haley? Haley, would you share just where you're coming from? What's your interest today? Why are you joining us?
Hi, I'm coming from northern Wisconsin. I work at a museum where I go into schools with museum visits. So I'm interested to see if this can be incorporated into our programs.
Okay, because are you personally telling stories? Is that?
I would be leading programs on nature things. So teaching science topics, and just interested to see how stories could fit into that to help kids relate.
Okay. Great. Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you. June, could I ask, would you share a little bit what you're doing?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah, I'm from North Central Pennsylvania. We used to have a competition up here at Mansfield University, but they don't do it anymore, storytelling competition.
Okay.
But I'm a grandma, and I just have an interest, and just from a kind of a literary standpoint, I'm not actually involved in any schools at the moment. So just, I guess, kind of a general interest.
Sure. Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And forgive me if I say names twice here because I'm trying to keep track of this. Linda, I don't think we heard from you. And no big deal if you're not right there or don't wish to speak. They're going a little bit out of order. Did Lori, would you like to share why you're joining us today?
Hi there, good morning. I'm Lori, and I bought your book. I haven't read the whole book, and I follow you. And during COVID, our business took a little bit of a turn, and we have started a literacy outreach enrichment program called Story Time with Horses. So we partner up with horses and other animals, and
great.
Anything you have to offer, I would like to know about.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Great. Boy, the list just kind of jumps all around here. Do I have a Mina? Mina, would you share just a little about yourself? And it's okay if you don't wish to. Okay, I think maybe I've gone through the list. Is there anybody else that would like to speak up, or maybe I skipped because it jumps around a bit?
Me, I'm here. Whitney.
Whitney, hello. Okay, welcome.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Whitney Myers, and I'm calling in from Austin, Texas. I have a business in Austin called Sacred Stories, and I record people's life stories on film.
Wow.
And just, I read the book.
Hmm.
I don't know how I found out about the book, but I read the book, and I loved the book. I'm interested in life stories and sharing our stories, and like you said, Joseph, just how that connects us, connects families, connects people.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, nice. Interesting little kind of group. Sounds kind of diverse and interesting and powerful. I appreciate all those elements of storytelling. Of course, our work is called How to Tell Stories to Children, but you know, storytelling is it's something that we all do, and this, I think this will kind of touch on that. So welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. So I'm going to kind of dive in, and I'm going to give a little bit of a presentation. And I'm someone, I really like dialogue, so I like the back and forth. So don't hesitate to interrupt me with a question if you have one, or say, wait a minute. Help me understand that a little bit more. There will be obvious sort of pauses throughout where we can do that. And so we'll just kind of start going down that path. And then, you know, plenty of time for questions. And we can also just talk about some really practical tips about storytelling if we want that at the end. Okay, I'm going to dive in. So I'm going to start with, have you heard of this book? There's a book called Sapiens. Okay, written by a man named Yuval Noah Harari. It's this one of these like mega international bestsellers. Doesn't matter if you know it or have heard of it. But I'm gonna give you just a little bit of a piece because it's such a beautiful entry into this point. Okay, he's a historian. He's a Israeli historian, and he is basically chronicling the last 100,000 years, give or take, of the human species, right? Okay. And his first chapter is called A Creature of No Significance. That's his term. And he's referring to human beings about 100,000 years ago. Now, why 100,000 years? Okay, 100,000 years because that's around when there is approximately scientific agreement. Like that's when Homo sapiens in our modern bodies and brains and everything arrives on the scene. Okay, approximately 100,000 years ago, and he says, you know, looking back, we think that's so significant, but it wasn't necessarily that significant. And at that time, it was still just a roving band of a small population of creatures, intelligent, interesting creatures, but nevertheless creatures that had very little impact compared to others on, you know, this planet-sized world that we live in. Okay, and around 60,000 years ago, okay, is where archaeologists and scientists are suddenly start to see a leap, okay, in human artifacts, practices. This is when, you know, this is where you start to see cave paintings, other stone tools and different things like this. Doesn't matter too much, right? All the details there. And he asked this question. He says, the scientists call this the cognitive revolution, okay? Because 100,000 years ago, anatomically, we are the same thing as our ancestors 100,000 years ago. But our ancestors 100,000 years ago were, well, you know, he says, not that complicated, not that rich in what they were doing. Around 60,000 years ago, there's this shift. Scientists call it the cognitive revolution because there's no anatomical difference in our bodies, our brains, our whatever. So what happened? Okay, and Yuval Noah Harari, the author here, he has a one-word answer, and that the shift is fiction. Fiction. Okay. Now, at first you go, fiction, wait. And he says, for the first time, around 60,000 years ago, for the first time ever on our planet, there were beings that could think things that did not exist, that didn't exist. Prior to that, maybe communication amongst the animal world and even amongst our own ancestors was rich. But what's happening is that creatures are communicating. Maybe, there's a predator over there. If you go over there, you can smell food. There's a river over here. 60,000 years ago, there's this flourishing of human development. And he attributes that to the ability, our own ability, to just understand fiction, understand things that are not true. This is a novel development, and it's actually extremely rich, because when people can start to do this, when they can start to think of things that don't yet exist, they can picture dwellings that maybe some people can now work towards making that a reality. They can picture tools that would be useful to them. They can even imagine, in some sense, a social structure that helps, that might help their little family, their little tribe work together. So fiction, that's his and I'm of course I'm extending that to storytelling. Okay, so I'm gonna divert a little bit into another researcher. His name is Brian Boyd, and he wrote a book called On the Origin of Stories. And if you like geeking out on storytelling things, I highly recommend that book. That was without question the most influential book on me when Silke and I began writing this. And it's pretty academic and dense, so you got to like that kind of thing. But he enters similar interest to Yuval Noah Harari. But he says, we actually have all these studies. And of course, I listed that in at the beginning of inviting everybody to this talk today. Children remember 600% more information when it's contained within a story, rather than just told as a specific fact or whatever it might be, right? And there's actually a lot of studies from fairly diverse forms identifying all these benefits that storytelling has on our cognitive abilities, right? Particularly things, our ability to remember, excuse me, but also our ability to empathize, our ability to be creative and communicate some of these things that we learn along the way. So Brian Boyd asked the question, why would any two people anywhere why would somebody speak or listen to somebody else when they know that what they're saying isn't true? When they know what they're saying isn't true? A story. Because of course we do that all of the time. We do it all of the time. I mean, we do it orally, and that's kind of the origin here. But of course, in our modern lives, we're doing that with movies. We're doing that with books. We engage all the time with stories. Stories are they saturate our lives. And yet often the ones we like best, we know that they're not true. So he's approaching it from this evolutionary perspective. And he's saying, what is the benefit here to the creature, to the organism, to the species, such that they would, in our modern sense, we can kind of understand it. We think it's enjoyable. It's how we entertain ourselves. I mean, as an individual, it's just kind of interesting and fun, and we like good stories. But he's asking, what is it that allows this to happen within this species? Because it must have some benefit. He's looking for the benefit. Similar to Yuval Noah Harari, his answer is a little more subtle, and that's that around this 60,000 years ago, as people started really, becoming modern in the sense that we think of ourselves. What made humans so unique, so powerful, was this incredible social relationship that we have. Humans are sometimes described as even a super social species. And what that means is that we enter into a relationship. We are actually capable of being, at least at some level, in relationship with people on the other side of the planet. We know at least a little bit about what they're doing, what they're thinking. We might share, we might feel a sense of community with them, having never even seen them or interacted with them. And, you know, other social species, a common one is ants. You know, think about ants. This is incredible, interesting what they do. But they're not communicating with other ants on the other side of the earth, you know? We are. And how do we moderate this incredible social skill that we have? And his answer is stories. It's through stories that we create the social groupings that have become so powerful for us as a species, as a group, as a nation, as a community, as a family, as a neighborhood, as a whatever you want it to be, right? And this sort of rings true, I think, when you think of families, neighborhoods, when you think of nations, when you think of religions, when you think of any kind of group where people are kind of bonded together and they're going, yes, we're part of something. There's something that holds us together, that sets us apart. Stories are not the only thing, but they are a very important one, right? So storytelling, and now this is where I'm going. What that says is that you're a storyteller. Of course you are. Everyone on the planet is a storyteller, and also you could say, story listener. It's possible for us, right? We're so saturated with story that we sometimes don't even necessarily think what it would be like to not understand a story, right? But all of us do it. And one of the reasons we do it, one of the reasons that this skill developed in us, in our ancestors, 60, 100,000, whatever many years ago, is because it helped us stay bonded as a group. Wow. I find that so unique and interesting because it speaks to me, and this is a message I put out a lot, which is that storytelling, we think it's about the story. We think it's about the narrative of the character and what progresses in the story, and maybe there's a lesson in the story, or maybe there's not, or whatever. And that is real, but there's something more subtle happening underneath the character development, the narrative, and that's you and I are becoming connected. You and I are connecting. Whenever somebody's telling a story to me and I'm listening, I'm truly listening. And if you've told stories before, you know this. I think you do. If you're telling, especially with kids, it works with adults too. But if you sit around with a group of kids, and this is how Silke and I got into this. We just do this all the time. We're just telling stories to kids. We walk away from those experiences. It touches your heart. It touches your heart. You feel connected. You feel appreciated. You feel seen. And so that's what my work is all about. I would just want to encourage people to do that, because in our modern lives, we are surrounded by so much story in the form of, it just comes in multiple forms now. Books, videos, movies, aunts and uncles, teachers, parents, whoever, we're so many stories. And this is what I find a lot. A lot of people are full of self-doubt because of that. because we're surrounded, because we can think of all the Disney movies. We can think of all the superheroes. We can think of all the whoever's, or the, that one teacher that we had in second grade, and gosh, wasn't she lovely? And we can sort of hold ourselves back. This happens. It happens to me too. It helps me remember that when I'm engaging in storytelling with my kids or my family, my friends, I'm reminding myself, oh, I'm not necessarily doing it because I'm going to tell this blockbuster story that everyone's going to remember, and then someone's going to want to publish it, and it's going to be a big deal or something, I'm doing it because I want to connect with this person right here, this one, or this group, or whatever it is. I think that's a very empowering message. And so I encourage you to let that sink in a little bit. Let that sink in a little bit. You are a storyteller. There are as many storytellers on the planet as there are people. And each one of us tells stories in your own unique and diverse voice. Your stories will be very different from my stories. And yet it's this powerful tool for creating connection. So that's my lens in. Okay, that's my big kind of theoretical background piece. There's a few other things that I want to touch on and become a little bit more, kind of bite-sized chunks. But I'd like to pause there and see if there's any questions or reflections or anything like that.
Thanks, Joseph. That was very interesting. This is June Caldwell. I haven't read your book yet, but I just it just made me think of something real quick. We live in an area that was a big lumbering region, and we have a museum here. And of course, they didn't do it during COVID, but every Halloween they do different stations for kids. But one of the neatest things about it to me is they do storytelling. And they take on the roles of the people in the lumber camps. And I just thought that was very powerful.
Yeah. Sounds wonderful. Sort of a reenactment thing, it sounds like, because you see that kind of thing all over in different ways.
Yeah, they do dress up too.
Yeah.
I think that was much better than the candy.
Yeah, sure. So, okay. Yeah, that really helps me. One thing I like to ask is just all of you listening right now, can you think back on somebody in your own life when you were a child that told stories to you? This could be a parent, could be a teacher, grandparent, neighbor, friend, anybody. Can you think back on somebody that told you stories? See if you can find that person. Okay, now what I'd like to ask is this. How are you feeling about that person right now? Like what's in your mind and heart when you bring this person into your mind? That's what I'm after. I'm after that. More than I'm after some incredible narrative that's, that's also great. It's also great. But I'm interested in that connection piece. Because yes, like you say, June, sometimes these events and children, they say, we're the same way. Well, the candy is exciting, or the cider or the whatever. But what sticks with you? Because as soon as you eat that piece of candy, it's kind of gone. You don't think of it anymore. It's lost to you for the most part. But when somebody takes the time to tell you a story and looks you in the eye, that sometimes those moments last with you your whole life. And it's not necessarily about coming from a incredibly practiced or rehearsed professional storyteller. Those things are also good. But children can tell when you're just with them. They value it. Even the kids that sometimes are fidgeting in the back and you think aren't paying attention, and you think they're rolling their eyes and they're not interested and it's too boring because it's not Ninja Turtles or whatever it is, right? The truth is those kids are sometimes getting touched to the core, even in ways that they don't know. Because this storytelling tool, you can think of it as a cognitive tool. It's a thing that just exists. And when you use it, when you practice it, like any other skill, it leaves people with something. You have this connection in place. So it takes courage. It takes courage to do it, sometimes at least. It does for me. To this day, I doubt myself, whether that's in front of my own daughter, who I've told thousands of stories to probably at this point. I still sometimes go, I'm not really good enough. She'd rather read a book. She'd rather do something else, or a group of kids, or standing in front of all of you. I have so much in my mind that says, you're not good enough. You're not good enough. And I have to sort of calm that place in myself to remind myself, oh, but here's why I'm doing it, because actually this connection matters. And that personal connection with kids, oh, so need that. We all of us at this time, we've always needed it. We've always needed it. But that's what movies can't do, right? I don't really like doing, comparing this. Sometimes people misinterpret me and Silke as like, kind of like saying, we're going back to the past and this is what our ancestors did. It's not what I'm doing. The books and the movies and everything are really great. This is different. And kids will recognize it. They know. Once they are experiencing this, I call it the storytelling relationship, because it really is that. Okay, this storytelling relationship. Sometimes you can make that connection on a one-off thing, where you just told this one great story and it's just like boom, and everybody remembers it and it's ever. That's pretty remarkable. It is. It's the regular practice of it where you get into this relationship and this ebb and flow. And this is what I often, Silke and I share in other workshops and things at times is establishing that. And I'm happy to dive into that, especially as I kind of get through this a little bit, but establishing those regular practices so that you can dive into that storytelling relationship and hone it. My experience is that every single child that I've kind of undertaken that with, it's eager to continue. Whenever story time comes up, it's like, oh yeah. And I've seen it happen in so many others too. Okay. Any other questions, or I'm going to move on a little bit.
One thought that I had as you're talking about this relationship is how those connections with the people who are hearing the story can make a response and reframe or offer another place of tangential divergence in the story. And then the story evolves in a way that...
In the way that they're listening?
Yeah, and the way that they're listening or the way that they might respond will allow something that character has never done before in the story. Or, as fiction goes, thinking about fiction, thinking about response and relationship between the two, the listeners and the storyteller, as well as the relationship between the storyteller and the story, and the listener and the story, and how those things can maybe move because of a relational moment or connection.
Absolutely. Beautiful perspective. And there's also something wonderful, right? If you work with kids or you have your own kids, you've had conflict probably arise. And you can know how, as a teacher or a parent or grandparent or whatever, how difficult it can be to be like, okay, look, it's you and me, and we're having this conversation. Children, it's adults too, it's me too. Even when you mean the best, right? This one-on-one thing can just put so much pressure on the relationship. When you introduce a story here, it's just like Sue, right? Like Sue said, it adds a sort of third person, this third person narrative that takes the pressure off of me and you, buddy, me and you. And now it's like, now we're engaging with this story, and we're speaking to each other through the lens of this story. And it just, especially for young children who really frequently don't like to be put on the spot, even for praise, but certainly not for criticism. That element of story can just help. So it's like we're a little bit conversing with this rather than straight on. Yeah, and in other ways, Silke and I share that the method that we kind of teach for storytelling relates to how children can take that, especially into their own play, and continue this. You know, when you share a story, the children engage with it, it becomes theirs too, because now it's in them, and they can take this. And it frequently does happen where then with their dolls, their whatevers, they're acting that story out, and it's becoming theirs, and they take it in whole new directions. It's such a beautiful thing to see. Talk about a solution for boredom all the time. So thank you. Okay. I'm gonna move a little bit into the subject of attention. And again, this is just me and my geeky science person coming out. There's this really excellent book. If there's some educators here, it's excellent for everybody too. It's called How We Learn, and it's by a man named Stanislas Dehaene. He's a French neuroscientist. Okay, so again, you got to like the science piece. That book is that's everybody could read that book, and should. So beautiful. Now he's a neuroscientist, so he's describing learning in. You can think of it as learning in the brain, but he's really talking about it at the level of learning in the neuron. So how does this thing that we all have, how does it learn? How does it take in and acquire and adapt to new information? Okay, and I'm going to highlight just one piece, and that's attention. Attention, because he gives such a rich and beautiful explanation of what attention is. Commonly, we think of attention, it's the thing that we're, well, are they giving you your attention? Or what are you giving your attention to? And so it can even be a subject that is occasionally fraught with conflict. And he helps explain what attention is in your brain. And that's this, okay? That our senses, right? So our eyes, our ears, especially, our nose, our mouth, or whatever. We're receiving this sensory input constantly, right? A huge part of what our brain does is keep most of it out. That's actually a big part of what our brain does, so that we are not overwhelmed. Especially our conscious part of what we are is not overwhelmed. Attention is the very mechanism in our brain that not only focuses on whatever we're giving our attention to, but what it does is it refires and enhances those neurons that fired. Okay, so maybe that's a little bit out there if that language is unfamiliar to you. But what that essential message is that whatever we're giving our attention to is actually repeated. It's repeated. That's what attention is. It's our ability to inside our brains, our neurons are refiring the same thing. And when our neurons refire, they're building that connection of whatever it is that we're giving our attention to. So this refiring of the neuron, it's like, it's like lifting weights for your neurons, okay? Because that's the way our brains and our neurons really all over the place work. And brings that attentive sense observation into higher orders of cognition. So I hope I'm not getting too weird and out there for you. But that's what attention is in our brain. And that's what this is. It's the first part of learning. Okay. So what are you giving your attention to? There is no such thing as not learning. There's no human on the planet that isn't learning. The question is, what are they learning? We're learning what we are giving our attention to. Now, why am I speaking about it here? Because of this social relationship and this history of storytelling in our species, storytelling is an incredibly powerful tool for getting someone's attention. If you ever attended a class, whether as a young child, high school, or an adult, can you think of a teacher that really stood out for you, that maybe brought your attention to something that maybe you didn't necessarily think was an exciting or interesting subject to you before? It may not be the case, but chances are some of the teachers that you've had in life that really brought you in, it's because they were good storytellers, because they made it come alive for you. It wasn't just, okay, well, here's the chemistry of atoms and, they look like this and blah, blah, blah. We get bored. That's the thing about our attention span. It's highly competitive within our own being for what we're going to give our attention to. We have a natural capacity to listen to stories. That's why we pay for them. Because I like to refer to stories as ice cream for your brain. It's ice cream for your brain. It's the thing that tells you, this is delicious. I love this. This is how I receive information. And not only do I, take in the calories, I enjoy it as I'm doing it. That's what movies are doing for us. That's what books are doing for us. That's what good storytellers are doing for us. They're getting our attention and they're going, oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. And now I'm giving you my attention. And as a storyteller, we can use that skill just in this simple way of like establishing this connection. We can also, and again, this is a different subject entirely, we can use that skill and design our stories thoughtfully so that not only are we drawing in a child's attention, we're directing it. We're directing it to what we wish to share with them, right? And that might be, again, as Sue mentioned, right? If we're dealing with a conflict, or I don't think you brought that up specifically, but maybe if we have a group of kids, whether you're at home and they're playing and you have some friends over and they get into an argument, or you're at school and you blah, 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 blah. It's really hard to like look at 3 kids and be like, well, what did you do? And now we're going to solve this problem and blah, 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 blah. It's really wonderful to get those kids and say, hey, have I ever told you this story? I once knew these 3 kids. This is a long time ago. And you frame it in the concept of a story. And that's hard to do on the spot, maybe. Maybe this is a few days later. Maybe you had this really difficult experience and you're like, whoa, I didn't know even my own son was so angry at me and he wouldn't listen. And it was an awful experience for everybody. I hated it. He hated it. Friends hated it. It was miserable, right? To bring that group of people back together and say, okay, I got this story. It's about 3 octopuses and they were out in the ocean and now everybody's listening to the story about an octopus. Okay, wait, what were the octopus doing? And within the context of that story, you offer some, not necessarily, I'm not a big like moral of the story kind of guy. Sometimes it's a little heavy-handed, but perspective on what happened. Because children, and it works for adults too, will often, it's just much easier to gain that perspective through this like mediator of a story than it is directly from like, well, you know what you did wrong, you know, this or that or the other. So again, the power of storytelling to gain attention, bring it in. And then as we practice to direct that attention, I use storytelling to teach all the time. I teach almost every subject with stories. I pepper them in and out because it makes it fun for the kids. Then they're engaged. Yeah. So just that piece of attention, that's what stories do for us. They call that attention in, and that's what attention is happening. That's what's happening in your brain at the time. It's your neurons refiring, retelling yourself the story. Have you ever found yourself doing that? Have you ever read a book or watched an incredible movie? And after the movie, are you still picturing parts of the movie in your own mind? That's your neurons refiring, telling yourself the story. You don't even need it anymore. Now you have it, enhancing that signal. You probably remember stories that you heard 40, 50 years ago. Okay, that's a piece on attention. I'll pause again. Any questions or things? Okay. I have one last piece that I can touch on, and it's, I really would like to keep this to an hour. I'm also really happy to open to just general Q&A or things like that, if that's an interest. Anybody want to speak up about that? Or just follow my lead?
Happy to follow your lead.
Okay, then I'll continue with that. Now this is the last one, okay? There's lots more. There's just tons. Storytelling science is so interesting. Each one is a little kernel of like, wow. Okay, the last one I'm going to bring up is Uri Hasson. Uri Hasson is another neuroscientist. He's out of Princeton. He did this incredible. There's a really great TED Talk. He gives a really wonderful TED Talk. So if you're kind of interested in that kind of thing, look up Uri Hasson. It's Urihasson, Uri Hasson TED Talk, 15 minutes on the power of storytelling. That's not his title. I forget his title. Okay. But here's the essential message. Okay. Here's what he does. He's hooking people up to whatever kind of, brain receptors there are out there. And he's reading people's brain waves as they're listening to a story, okay? And he does this with the speaker too. So he does it with the speaker and he does it with these listeners, okay? And what he demonstrates is that when people are listening to a story, they're the brain waves, and I don't understand much about brain waves. I don't know what brain waves are. It's kind of a weird thing. What are brain waves? But in the listeners, all of the listeners and the speaker, their brain waves synchronize. They become synchronized. So beforehand, it's sort of like chatter. Everybody's just, in their own whatever. And then when you have suddenly storyteller and people are listening, and now everybody is on the same wavelength. I mean, quite literally, it's sort of amazing, right? And then he's so interesting. He takes this like 2, 3, 4 steps down the line. So he keeps kind of modifying his experiment. Okay. So he does things like he gets like Russian, I think he is a Russian man originally. He's in the US. He gets Russian speakers, I think a few others. And the story is told in a different language. So the people who are hearing it in English, people who are hearing it in Russian, whatever it is, same synchronization, same. So it's a different language, different words, same synchronization in their brainwaves, okay? And then he takes it another degree further. And he basically, he takes the story and he kind of cuts it up into fragments so that instead of hearing the story as like a narrative and progressing, they only hear like fragments of it, and then it shifts, and fragments of it, and shifts, and fragments and shifts. And what happens is people show certain areas of their brain light up for like word recognition and things, but not the and I'm not perfect in understanding all this, but not the like frontal lobe pieces that represent the higher order levels of cognition. So people are understanding the words, but they're not synchronizing in the same way because they're not hearing and understanding the story. And so he explains it's better than me. But what he's demonstrating is that it goes beyond the level of understanding words. It goes beyond that to understanding the story of those words. And when we understand that story, and he's using story very loosely here, you know, and in a lot of ways, I'm telling you a story right now, right? Much of what I'm sharing is sort of in the realm of story. There's this shared understanding. So again, it all speaks to this same point. We are creatures that can do this for some reason, and it's incredibly rich and powerful. And it's a really wonderful way. It can be very simple with children because it's a beautiful way to connect. And they have, you know, it's like they have the antenna. They're receptive. They're ready for it. They can be storytellers too. Children can tell stories, and you can tell interactive stories. It's all vice versa. It can flow in all those ways. It is the creature that we are. That's what we are. And when we take the courage to use this skill, it creates lasting bonds of intimacy. And that's what we all treasure. It's what don't we? Or I do. That's what I treasure in life is that feeling of walking away from that moment going like, I really connected with so-and-so or with that group. You know, it's not even the story itself. It's that feeling of connection. That's what I'm interested in. So yeah, that's the last piece that I wanted to bring up. So that's at least what I prepared, although I can talk about the memory piece if anybody wants, unless we have questions.
When you were talking about the stringing of words together is different from understanding a thread of a story, it made me reflect on, particularly with young children, which is the population I work with, of how different humans' processing speed allows them immediate comprehension or maybe a delayed comprehension, and how in storytelling, not that you want to fragment it at all, because then you lose comprehension, but this idea of creating moments in the context of a story where meaning can sync. And those words and the neurons and each piece of what you talked about to me creates a thread of a story to consider as a whole. So anyways, just reflecting on that, thinking about a couple of little people that I work with, and just thank you. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody have any questions or reflections?
I have a question for you, Joseph. Do you think storytelling would, and maybe Sue can chime in on this too. I have a grandson who's a little over 1.5 years, and he just had his 18-month checkup, and there's a small concern about him not being more verbal. Do you think storytelling would help with that? over just reading a book to him?
Oh, well, I definitely think it would help over reading a book. I do think that. And that I also want to caution myself because I don't want to misrepresent myself as knowing something that I don't. I do think the engagement, without question. In fact, there's tons and tons and tons of studies. This actually you can look up. There's tons of studies out there that say that parents who are speaking regularly and engaging with their kids, and it doesn't even have to be, the babble also is important. It can also be that. It's one of the highest indicators of a child's developmental success later on in life. Children who don't get spoken to, who are left behind in and don't get that facial interaction, and don't get that. Even if your grandson, your grandchild is not verbal, that surely they're receptive, they're noticing you, and there's really good and excellent research out there about that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, he is verbal, but not to his age level at the present time. So
Right. Yeah. And people are also pretty developmentally different too. I would say as someone I'm not an early childhood expert. So again, I don't want to misrepresent myself there. But it's so obvious that people are developmentally very different, very different. And so especially at 1.5, boy, I wouldn't jump to any conclusions on that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm pretty content wrapping up, unless anybody has a burning question or thing or anything like that. Thank you so much for joining. I just enjoy talking about this stuff, and I hope that it's meaningful. Thanks for showing up today. Wish you good things out there.